Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Young Pope, Episode 1. It's called Lenny, the American Pope. And I suppose I'll do a little spoiler-free section since it's a first episode. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thanks to Fletcher for picking this show. I did not know a lot about this show. I knew it existed. I knew Jude was in it. But that was pretty much it. I had no idea what to expect. And what I found, based on this first episode, is that it's very much kind of a show that's set, obviously, in the Vatican about this character who's a young pope. He's only in his 40s, and he's taken over, played by Jude, of course. And it's very much about him going up against a lot of the ideas of how things are run. He's going to do some things differently. The show, at least in this first episode, seems to play with this idea throughout of like, okay, what does he actually think? What does he actually feel? Is he throwing his weight around because he wants to be strict? Is he throwing his weight around because he disagrees with a lot of things? Is, you know, what exactly are his beliefs and motivations and what he's doing? And he does come across as very antagonistic towards a lot of people around him, particularly the people that are there. There's like one character he brings in that's kind of his confidant. Everyone else is kind of, you know, part of the system, and he tries to, you know, use some of them to his advantage, and that's where it starts to feel very political. Like he's making moves, he's putting things in place to make sure he's got safety nets, and he's got intel, and he's got whatever, right? There's a lot of that going on. But there is a line I think he says to someone later in the episode. I can't remember the exact way he phrases it, but he talks about how keeping people sort of on their toes as to what he's actually thinking is a big part of his power. And the episode actually starts with what turns out to be a dream sequence of him giving his first like sort of public address to the masses. And it goes kind of wild, and he says a bunch of things that you'd never hear a pope say, and he ultimately wakes up. But when he says that later on in the episode, I thought back to that opening, and I almost thought, oh, is that them poking fun at the audience a little bit of like, oh, we're keeping the audience on their toes as to exactly what's going on in his head. We get more of a window than the characters in the show do, because we can actually maybe go into his head occasionally if the show takes us there. But are we actually going to see what's real, or is his head and what he's thinking even true to what he's actually considering in some ways? And that seems to be one of the bigger strengths of like, or the bigger concepts in the show and how it wants to pursue things. I was shocked that the episode doesn't end with him making his actual first public address because of the way it opened with the fake version. I thought we'd get the real version by the end. It felt like maybe we were going to build up to that, but we're not quite there yet. That's something that probably comes, probably not too much later, but down the line, an episode or two after this one. But it also has Diane Keaton in here. That's kind of the one character that he cares about and is sort of as a confidant. She was at the orphanage that he grew up at, so that kind of makes him kind of her. She's a mother figure to him. She seems to be the one person that he trusts and values the opinion of, and wants to have her kind of close. And that's also something that ruffles some feathers, because this role is supposed to be for someone experienced in the role. This like the assistant to the Pope, Vice Pope, whatever the term is, I don't know. So those moments or those plot elements are solid. They're fine. I do think it's got a big bombshell to end on, which I'll save for spoilers, which we're probably about to get into because I don't know how much more I want to dance around things. It's kind of an interesting show. It's not like something that has a subject that I typically, I'm not gravitated towards the topic of religion in general. It's not something I'm that interested in or particularly like. Obviously, there's a lot of satirical elements in this show where it's poking at the decisions that are made and maybe is scrutinizing how political perhaps the church actually is and how some of these decisions are made, and so on. And I can obviously kind of get on board with that kind of side of things, but it isn't inherently a subject that does appeal to me. But I will say this episode does a pretty decent job of giving you entertaining sequences where a lot of it revolves around other characters reacting to how Jude Law's character, Lenny Bellardo? Lenny Bellardo is his name, although his Pope's name is Pope Pius 13. Yeah, okay, whatever. But it's a lot of like other characters reacting to him. There's one particular scene in sort of the later, middle to late half of the episode where one of the more prominent characters who's kind of like telling him what his duties are. I think it's Cardinal Viello. He has a big scene with Jude Law's character where it goes on for an extended time. It's a good 5+ minute scene of basically navigating how to talk to this character, how Jude Law reacts to things that he says, how disinterested he is. There's a little bit of dark humor kind of mixed in. And it's those types of scenes that kind of will show, at least in episode 1, is kind of shining, because it's very much about these opposing forces and the realization of like what they might have to deal with now with this guy in charge, and is he going to shake things up in a way that they don't want? You know, very, you know, interesting at the very least, if nothing else, when it starts to play with those things. But the performances are good. Probably one of the most satisfying things in the show is watching the face of a character like this Cardinal as he realizes how resistant the Pope is being to all of his suggestions, where he's not wanting to talk about any of the concerns that he has. He instead's insisting on certain things, watching him freak out at little moments, or sort of have to hold his tongue because he's supposed to speak with respect the entire time, even if he thinks what Jude Law's saying or doing is absolutely ludicrous. He has to sort of stick to his guns and present as if he's being a loyal servant of the Holy One or whatever. That stuff is somewhat entertaining, and I think the performance from the actor, Silvio Orlando in this case, is very good at watching him kind of grit his teeth and present himself in a certain way. So, yeah, I'll just say spoilers now for the first episode. Just, you know, be warned. I don't think there's too much to spoil in this outside of like where it goes at the very end. Which, honestly, as it was building up to the ending, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of the perfect premise for what this show is, actually. So I'm going to start with that, as weird as that sounds. But the end of this episode is Jude Law's character admitting that he doesn't believe in God, which is exceptionally funny. Now, he does say, of course, right after that he was joking, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't joking. A big part of this first episode, one of the sort of the power plays that his character does, is that he effectively corrupts and recruits the main priest who takes all the confessions in the Vatican, right? Or at least around the Pope circles and all the higher-ups, and basically says, hey, I'm the Pope and I order you to give me all the confessions that you hear. Now, we don't actually hear him say that, of course, it's just heavily implied, and obviously the final scene's him asking for more intel. But it's this idea that he can use anything he hears to his advantage. He wants to have dirt on people. You know, there's a scene early on when he's first speaking to this priest where he's like, hey, how many confessions do you hear? And he's like, oh, I hear, you know, all the cardinals, I hear this, blah, blah. And he goes on to like a list, kind of a big selection of people from the church that he gets to hear. And it's like, oh, you've got a purpose. I'm about to give you a big purpose. And we know that he's done this because we do get a scene with the cardinal I was just talking about in the other scene, Viello. He actually goes to the confession, and his sin that he admits is that he had impure thoughts about a statue that's in the Pope's office. And he, you know, he does the confession thing. It's not a big deal. But later on in that same scene I was talking about, where he's talking to the Pope, there's a great little moment where he's looking over at the statue and the Pope says, stop looking at the statue that way. And you know instantly that he's heard this confession that we already heard from the other priests. He knows about it, so he's poking at it at the right moment in the conversation to keep the cardinal on his toes, to keep him guessing, to keep him uncomfortable and off balance. I think that's the little mechanical sort of thing that I enjoy in the writing here. By the end of the episode, like, he goes to the priest again, and they have this sort of secret meeting on the roof. And he's like, hey, okay, what have you heard? Tell me what you're hearing from confession. And he's not really getting much to report beyond what he had earlier, but he does kind of say, oh, people are wondering about what you're going to say to the public. People are wondering about this Sister Mary, and who is she, and why is she here? All this stuff. But the episode ends with him saying he wants to give confession himself. And he's like, let's just do it here on the roof. And he's like, okay. And he basically admits that he doesn't believe in God. And I love that because he's building up to it, and it's clearly where he's going, given what he says, where he says he doesn't believe in something else specifically, but it's clearly building to, I just don't believe in God. And there's a great moment where the priest that he's confessing to starts like panicking and be like, what are you saying? Holy One, what are you saying? Like, he's really freaking out. And then Jude Law smiles after it and says, I'm only kidding. And he's like, oh, oh, oh. But there's just a little glance that he gives afterwards, and that's where the episode ends, where I think it's pretty clear that, no, there was some truth to what he just said. He does not believe in God. And it kind of links back to the opening dream sequence where he goes out and makes his first public address, and it's treated very, you know, like the clouds literally part and sun shines through when he comes out and opens his arms. Everyone cheers, everyone's happy to see him. And he says a bunch of things you expect to begin with, but then ultimately starts saying things like, we should celebrate gay marriage, we should allow abortions, enjoy masturbating, you know, like, have fun, play, you know, this is what freedom is, blah, blah. And, like, it's a funny scene because you see, like, cardinals and bishops and stuff fainting and running to try and stop him from saying what he's saying. Like, it's all very entertaining, and then he wakes up and you're wondering, oh, was that just a weird dream he was having because of the pressures of being Pope, or is there truth in what he was saying in the dream? And I think the ending kind of indicates that no, he actually does have some of these feelings, or at the very least he's nudging towards them, if he's not like outright believing all those things already. But that opening dream sequence actually got a lot of interesting little bits that I really liked. In particular, the opening shot, which is clearly a dream, it's sort of a dream within a dream, which usually I would moan about that in a horror movie. Here it's whatever, because it's all like strict character drama and exploration. But the opening shot is like him crawling out from under a big pile of babies. It's actually a really weird visual. It's obviously by far the most surreal thing that we've got in the episode. But he crawls out from under this big pile of babies, and he's in like the middle of the big town square sort of area. And then he wakes up, and I think what was notable to me, it was emphasizing kind of like that this is a modern set story, right? Because it goes from this ultra biblical dream, and even though we're still technically in a dream, you know, we find out later that we're still in a dream. He wakes up to the sound of an iPhone ringtone, or the alarm sound, right? I'm sure you've all heard it. You know what it sounds like. And there's a radio like struggling to like hear things, and it's all very much like immediately saying, hey, he is a man of the modern world, modern technology, but he's been thrust into this ultra traditional conservative power that's been around for however long. But he's sitting there with an iPhone. And even once he actually does wake up and he's being kind of like stern with all the staff, he's like, no, I want my Cherry Coke Zero. Because they've prepared like a little bit of everything, because no one bothered to ask him what he likes for breakfast. So they have like donuts, they've got chocolate, they've got you know, eggs, bacon, they've got a little bit of like they've got fruit, they've got a whole buffet out. They're just going to be wasted because he's like, I don't really eat breakfast, I just like a Cherry Coke Zero. And he insists on not doing it until he gets it. But to go back to the dream, they really like build a big cinematic kind of intro out of him like walking through the building, going past a lot of the other religious figures, and waiting for it to be time to go up and speak to the public. And during all this, there's a lot of like, you know, emphasis on the people looking at him and the pressure of going out there and how calm and collected he kind of is. But there's also little other things, like for example, when he sits down to wait to go out to speak, there's like a sort of like memory, or maybe like a warped memory that appears in his head. It cuts, it's a very stark cut because it cuts to a topless woman sitting on a picnic blanket and him as a child watching from a tree, and she's kind of posing in a very unnatural way, like she's posing for him. I'm sure that's the dream kind of, you know, if he did see a topless woman when he was that young, like out in a forest somewhere, I'm sure it didn't happen exactly like this, but it certainly gives the idea that he's thinking about, well, impure things that he's not supposed to be, and kind of, and at that point I was thinking, oh, is this going to be about sort of showing, okay, like the Pope and like the cardinals and the bishops and all that present themselves a certain way, but there is obviously still thoughts, there's still desires, there's still all these things. We're going to sort of look at maybe some of the hypocrisy. Obviously, as the show goes on here, in this first episode, and you get, no, this is more about a character who clearly is a bit of a radical change for the church. And some of the things we learn, actually, there's a scene early on where there's like 3 cardinals kind of standing around just discussing the new pope, and their kind of weird feelings about it. One's like really upset about it. Another one's like, oh no, he's young, he's malleable, we can manipulate him. He actually says that line, we can manipulate him. He doesn't even dress it up in any other way. And they're kind of discussing it, but they also reveal that like he's the Jude Law's character is the protege of this other priest, and what's that priest going to do now that his awful protege is Pope? And almost right after this, I think it cuts to what's his name? I'm forgetting his name. James Cornwell, right? From a bunch of things you've probably seen. But he's just staring into a mirror and he pulls out a razor blade and it looks like he's going to kill himself. And some nuns have to run in and grab him and stop him from doing it. So it does make you wonder about the backstory here and like, how awful was Jude Law to this guy? Or does this guy just know like who Jude Law's character is? Does he know that Jude Law's character does not really believe in God and doesn't believe in all this stuff and thinks that this is like a terrible like omen for things to come and this is going to ruin the Catholic Church or whatever? I don't know, but like it does put a new spin in that scene when you look back at it, knowing what we hear from Jude Law's character at the end, because it's like, okay, how much does he know about how Jude Law feels, and is that why he's so disillusioned with him becoming Pope? And it also sounds like Jude Law becoming Pope was a political move in and of itself, because the people making this decision sort of push for him because they think they could control him. That's the other thing the Cardinals talk about. They weren't the ones making the decision, but they talk about who did, and that there was a push for it because of this, because they think they can control him. But of course, everything we see in this episode is every time anyone tells him to do anything, he immediately says no, or just says, no, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I actually think we should be doing here. And he really does throw around his weight as authority by saying, I'm Pope now. I decide things now. You know, you say you belong to God? Well, I'm working on his behalf. I'm his right hand, which means you belong to me. He says that at one point in this episode. There's a lot of just interesting kind of like dynamics that come up from that are presented with how he is around the other characters, and just simple little things. Like there's a whole bit later on where he wants to go and look at one of the statues, but when he tries to go into the sort of main area, he's horrified that there's tourists everywhere, and he immediately shuts the door and kind of hides. And he asks the priest that sort of like runs the area to like close it all off so that he can go and to get a quiet bit of time with the statue. And there's a legitimately funny little moment where he says, was it difficult to close it off to the public? And the priest just kind of goes, no, we just hung up a sign that said closed. And Jude Law almost like kind of like gives a genuine like little smirk of like, oh, it's that simple. You like, I like how you are practical. you didn't like just kiss up to me. You just sort of did the logical thing. I don't know. Like there's probably more to read into some of this that maybe if I get more about the character, I could probably analyze a bit more. But yeah, I think the big scene of the episode, though, is the scene with the Cardinal Viello talking to the Pope and trying to like tell him what these duties are. The scene actually starts with him saying, hey, there's a button under the desk that if you find like a meeting you're having going unagreeable or you don't want to deal with it anymore, you can press that button and someone will come in and give you an excuse to get out of it. And Jude Law's like, well, you mean no lies? Like, yes, but they'll have plenty of times to repent for that. You know, it's very much, again, it's kind of showing the hypocrisy a little bit. And given what we know Jude Law says at the end about believing in God, it does kind of feel like he's pointing out the hypocrisy. As opposed to in the moment, you might read it as him saying, wait, you would have someone lie? That's, you know, like as if he's about to say that's wrong and like be really forceful about enforcing the rules of everything or whatever. But, you know, this scene has some build up to it as well, because we see Cardinal Viello like practicing earlier in the day, and he has like a wingman, like another priest that's sitting in the back that he has like laugh at his jokes and say, don't laugh too hard, but definitely laugh, you know, let's keep the atmosphere this or that. And of course, once they're in the meeting, everything that Viello tries to say that is remotely funny or pleasant lands with a thud. Because we already had a scene earlier on during the breakfast scene where the cook comes out and like kisses him and says, oh, I'll give you whatever you want for lunch, and kind of squeezes his cheek. And he immediately like shoots that down and says, hey, I don't like friendly relationships. They always end messy. But a formal relationship, that is like solid. It's got rules. It's defined. It's blah, blah, blah. And he makes this woman cry. And she's realizing, like, he's in charge now. I have to, like, go along with this. I can't be who I was with the old Pope. So it sets that up, and it kind of, like, takes it further with this scene with the Cardinal, where he tries to make jokes, he tries to be personable, he's trying to be nice the entire time, even though you can see there's a, you know, he's playing the political game a little bit, but none of the tricks are working. The Pope is shooting him down at every single turn. You're like, hey, this is an imminent concern. He's like, later, I'll deal with it later. Well, this is important after that. I'll deal with that later. When he eventually says, I assume you want to deal with this thing later, that's immediately when he goes, no, we'll talk about that now. We'll do that now. I'm going to appoint Sister Mary as my assistant, blah, blah. And we get that whole thing. Where he really, like, again, this guy, like, is kissing his ass. The Cardinal's saying, hey, oh, that's an inspired idea. However, it's believed that you should do it for this reason. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm Pope. But Sister Mary's my assistant. Also, she's going to monitor everything you're doing and be your guardian angel and report back to me. She's going to keep an eye on you, basically. And he tries to weasel out of that by saying that he's 60 and he doesn't need a guardian angel, or that he'll choose his own. And again, Jude Law just shoots it down. It's definitely the scene of the episode in many ways, because it really sets up how he's going to interact with everyone else. It really sets up perhaps the main rivalry. You know, I said that Jude Law's character is antagonistic to a lot of people around him, but given that he is the main character to not even some extent, he just is. It feels like Viello is going to turn out to be more of the rival or whatever. Because, I mean, he immediately, in like the scene or two after, he gets his wingman to basically start digging up dirt and say, hey, we have to be prepared for this guy. Now that I've seen what he's like, we want to have information. Information is power. Which, again, it just frames the entire thing as this is a political game. Rather than they're all here to just spread the word of God and make the world a better place. It's more about who's in charge, how we do things, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I mean, the episode did a good job of setting up those ideas, setting up the themes. There's a little bit of a mystery to Jude Law's character, because, well, we get that dream at the start, the way he starts talking to people as soon as he wakes up, the way he's throwing his weight around. But then he brings in this nun, and we get a glimpse of his backstory, but not too much yet. It does feel like he's an enigma to most people around him, perhaps except Mary and possibly that priest that tried to kill himself, who clearly is not feeling too good about Jude Law becoming Pope. Like, those elements are, like, building a little bit of intrigue about who his character is and why he believes what he does, what he believes. And it does also raise the question of, if he really feels this way and he is like a non-believer, does Sister Mary know that? Is Sister Mary kind of really on his side regardless of that? Or is she also, like, fooled by who he is? I don't know. Like, it's definitely curious as to what that relationship actually is. I mean, obviously there's a face value version of it that's presented to us in this episode, but given what we now think or know how he feels about everything, it does maybe make that relationship a bit weirder and more interesting, depending on, like, how much of that she knows. But yeah, it definitely builds some mystique around the character, as if there's a lot to learn from him, and keeps us on our toes, which is why that final moment of him saying that he doesn't believe in God and then pretending that he's joking. And I do take it as pretending that he's joking because of the way the performance tells us. So, you know, and on that sense, I guess Jude Law's doing a good job, because I got that from the final moment. Or maybe they're going to play it as ambiguous the entire time. Maybe they're going to keep us on our toes. Like, does the Pope actually believe in God? It's an interesting thing to build your show around when that's what your premise is. But, yeah, I mean, other than that, you know, the locations mean that the show has a good, distinct style to it, at least in terms of, if not cinematography, although there is a couple of moments, especially in the dream sequence early on, where it does do some fancy stuff, or maybe more standout stuff, perhaps is a better way of putting it. But because we have all these big fancy locations, these big sort of cathedral looking places, these buildings that are, well, you know, I don't know if they're actually shooting any of this at any of the real places, but they're at least mimicking the idea of what buildings in the Vatican look like, and all of that, like all of these big kind of old buildings with the architecture, everything looks very fancy. and kind of it presents a very traditional looking, prestigious place. So to have this sort of wrench in it of this new character who is going to shake things up and ruffle some feathers, works well thematically. So yeah, so and you see that visual throughout the episode represented with him like smoking in places he's not supposed to be, such as the confessional or whatever. It does present a simple visual of him sticking out and doing something that he's not supposed to in a place of, you know, worship, a place of like utmost scrutiny and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on episode 1. It's, I mean, do I, like, if I was watching this on my own, would I be sticking around for more? I actually don't know, because I still don't know how much the premise of the show is like that for me, in terms of like being interested in the subject matter, even though I think it does a decent job in this first episode of just making me care about the character dynamics and the politics of it, and that's where the intrigue's coming from. For now, this is a one and done. Maybe Fletcher will make me go back to it in the future, but for now, this was just checking out the first episode, so do not expect episode 2 in a couple of weeks. But if you have seen The Young Pope, by all means, do comment down below and let me know what you thought of it. And yeah, that's the show. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. You wouldn't be able to do all the reviews on here, all the movie podcasts over MailFuzz Movies without the support, either via Patreon or YouTube membership's an option if that's something you'd prefer to do. But thank you very much for joining me. All the usual things, like, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?